Sun Devil fans, it is a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, talking to you a little bit more about ASU's next upcoming game, specifically Oregon at Arizona State. We'll be previewing that and more, looking at some of the betting odds as well. Finishing up today's podcast with Chad Reuter's latest mock draft and looking at the Sun Devils taken in that mock. You're listening to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm sorry, was that my cue?
No. Yes, hike was the cue. We go on hike. I don't know why that's so hard to understand. Sun Devil fans, again, it is Wednesday on the podcast. For those of you that don't know, Rich and I have our roles each and every pod, and we switch off taking responsibilities. I am hosting this week, which means Richie does the clicks, and he forgot he was doing the clicks. But from here on out, we're going to have the rest of this podcast on lockdown, bringing you guys the best Sun Devils content. You can find us on Twitter. You can find me at Cedrios, and you can find Richie at Richie Brads with the Z36. You can also follow our Locked On Sun Devils Twitter page. It's at LO_Sun Devils. And then wherever you get your podcast, which could be Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, or even YouTube, which we are currently on now as well. You guys can find us in multiple different platforms, getting you, again, the best Sun Devils content that we have around. So with that, Richie, let's go ahead and start. But before that, again, thank you so much for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available on all of those platforms, as I had mentioned. Now, Oregon is coming to ASU. ASU needs a win. They do, right? They've gone on a recent cold streak playing some really good basketball teams. They did beat Oregon in Oregon before in overtime. Richie, I've got a very bad feeling against it in going into this game. We'll kind of talk about that, why, as in a little bit more detail coming up. But Oregon's a very quality basketball team. Very quality in the Pac-12. Either, as of right now, I don't remember the standings off the top of my head. They're either third or fourth, but they've beaten teams like USC. So very quality team. For ASU to get, I don't remember, was that their first conference win of the season? Because I think they had the game against Washington State right before that. So they were 0-1. Then I think Oregon made them 1-1 at that point, if I remember correctly.
It was indeed our first Pac-12 win of the season. It was our first win in Eugene in like 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, something crazy. I do remember them talking about that stat before. And again, it took ASU kind of a win in overtime for them just to win by 2. Going back to, I don't want to say it's a narrative per se, but ASU, when they win close games, generally less than 5. When they lose, those games don't seem to nearly be as close. So, Richie, general thoughts going into this game, kind of a breakdown of Oregon's team, anybody that we should be looking out for?
Connor, I want to be confident in this game because we beat them last time, but if we take a look, dude, this was not a pretty win. Oregon was shooting we said 18% from deep. They shot 42% as a team, but that's with their top scorer, is it Richards or Richardson? Yeah, Will Richardson. Yeah, he went 2 of 14 on the night.
And they lost by 2.
12. Yeah, exactly. It's like that, what we've talked about previously with ASU losses, where if like DJ Horn's hitting 2 more shots, we win this game. If Richardson hits 2 more shots of his 14, they beat us. So it's just one of those things where it's like we kind of caught lightning in a bottle and we were able to beat them in overtime. And it was a great feel-good win. But Oregon is a much better basketball team. You know, too, that they circled this game on their calendars because they were not expecting to lose at home to this Arizona State Sun Devils team that had just come out of the year flatter than day old soda. And Connor, you know as well as I do that rivalries don't necessarily need to be completely built off of in-state and hatred for each other. Just the fact alone that ASU and Oregon play in the same conference is enough. And just the fact that ASU, being as lowly a team as they are, embarrass them in their own conference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oregon's
I think that's
pretty PO'd.
I think that's where you're more right on the money. I don't think rivalry is quite the term I would use, but and I know exactly what you're trying to say as well. But considering how poorly that game went for Oregon, for them to lose, I think they're going to want to be able to beat ASU and beat them by a healthy margin. So their top three scorers, Will Richardson, Jacob Young, and Davian Harmon, all average 11 points or more. Those three as a team averaged 37 points per game and change. The game where we beat them, Will Richardson had 8 points. Harmon had 11, which led the trio, and Young had 7. So altogether, you're talking about 26 points. That's 11 less points than their top three scorers normally score, and they lost by 2. So, and we can't take this away from the Sun Devils. They earned this win, right? It was a great game for them at the time, coming off the Battle for Atlantis tournament, an embarrassing game against Washington State. So going to Eugene, which, again, you kind of mentioned the historical significance of it. Not winning there in such a long time was kind of the last thing people expected. So with that, can ASU repeat their success? We'll talk about some of the betting odds later on, and Vegas doesn't seem to think it's too crazy for them to win. Looking at last game, they shot, last game against Oregon, I should say, they shot just under 47% as a team, a mark they don't tend to hit very often. They shot 38% as a team, going 8 for 21. Again, a mark that's about 10% higher than their season average as a team. And from that game, they only went 7 of 12 from the free throw line. So not a ton of free throw attempts, only getting about 58%. But when I look at some of those numbers there, it tells me that they have to be shooting well, right? They have to be shooting well. They cannot afford to be a very average team or even a well below average team, even in the Pac-12 like they have been. They have to be able to play solid defense. That's the only way they're going to be able to come out with a victory. We'll kind of see where it goes from there. But I think earlier we talked about, I don't remember if it was yesterday, we talked about Kamani Lawrence DJ Horn and Marion Jackson.
That was yesterday, correct.
We're going to need both those players to be able to step up and essentially give it their all against Oregon. Or I unfortunately see a bad loss coming up against this Ducks team.
Well, and that's the one positive we can take out of this, Connor, is we look at the game and yes, Oregon had a lot of miscues that ultimately led to them losing the game in overtime, but ASU played a very sound game, shooting almost 50%, Connor. And this was one of DJ Horn's breakout performances where he shot 50% from the field, 23 points. He came out and just really put the Pac-12 on notice and basically said, hey, I'm one of the best guys in this conference. Like, you need to start paying attention to me. And Horn has really never looked back outside of this cold stretch that he's been on lately. Horn has been the most consistent and most dominant ASU Sun Devil basketball player this year. So he came out, was terrific. The rest of the team played solid. Kamani Lawrence had 13. Jay Heath had 14 off the bench. But again, you collectively shot 47 or 48%. You need that kind of team effort once again. The good news, Connor, Marion Jackson is heating up because in this previous game, he was a whopping 0 from 5 on the field, 0 points on the game. That's going to be a lot different. And having Marion in that equation does give you a little bit of hope for this game. In the famous words of one Jim Carrey from Dumb and Dumber, so you're saying there's a chance?
There is a chance. This would not be the greatest upset in college basketball this season, let alone history.
But was versus UCLA.
Yeah, seriously. A nobody school beating up the number 3 team in the nation. So, but looking at these teams kind of just very high level here, as far as offensively goes, Oregon is 4th in the Pac-12, scoring just below 73 points per game. Just behind essentially all the 3 big 3 schools, what I would say in the Pac-12. Arizona State, bottom dweller scoring team, scoring just under 64 points per game, which is dead last. As far as points given up, Arizona State is 9th, giving up 70 points per game, and Oregon is 7th, giving up 66 points per game. So defense is not exactly, or does not seem to be the calling card of either of these teams as far as just total numbers go. Right. We get into 3-point percentage. You guessed it, Richie. ASU is at the very bottom of the Pac-12, shooting just under 29%, which I will throw in there. They're the only team shooting under 30% from deep as a team in the Pac-12.
Not great.
Meanwhile, Oregon is 2nd, shooting just under 35%. only behind Colorado. So the team's going to have their work cut out for them. Rebounding is not necessarily a strength of this Oregon team. They do, or essentially as far as rebounding on offense, they're 10th in the Pac-12. Meanwhile, on defense, they're 6th. Arizona State, however, is 8th on offense. And then they are dead last on rebounding defense. So not necessarily a very high rebounding or assist team in this case. So let's break this game down in a little bit more detail. We'll talk about some of the scoring odds and a little bit more in the next part of the podcast. But first, let's talk about our friends over at Richie. My apologies there. I don't remember who our first ad break is.
Built Bar.
Built Bar. Yeah, we're starting with Built Bar.
Here you go. Oh, man, it's that time of the year where I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. This year, I'm sticking to my resolutions, and it feels like I'm not even really sticking to my resolutions because I enjoy them. And what am I referring to? I'm referring to Built Bar. Have you tried the Puffs yet? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Just like all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. Go to Built.com and scroll down to the macros chart and you'll be blown away in how they're high in protein, low in calorie, high in fiber, low in carb, 17 grams of protein. Pretty much the great taste of a candy bar, but it's healthy for you. It's amazing. Tons of different flavors too. Mint brownie, coconut almond. And right now for this month, there's the white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious and new flavors are coming out all the time. If you think a flavor might be good, they'll make it happen. It will be delicious and just for you. So go to BuiltBar.com right now and check out what's available there. BuiltBar.com.
It is Super Week, brought to you by Get Upside, and there's no better place to get the coverage of the big game other than the Locked On NFL podcast. Locked On Bengals and Locked On Rams that were in LA this past weekend. Hear everything about the Super Bowl on all of these different podcasts. Now, Richie, let's get into the second part here. Still moving on with basketball. We're going to be talking a little bit more specifically about some of the betting odds for this game. Now, ASU currently opens up, and let me make sure I get this number right. I want to say Oregon at ASU are currently 4.5 point favorites. Over under is set at 135.5. I think that's a little bit more generous than I think Vegas was intending to be, in my opinion. But generally, Vegas knows what they're talking about much more often than not. So just to put this number in perspective, I mentioned some of the average numbers, right, going into this game. So in terms of the scoring offense for Oregon at 72.2 and Arizona State at 63.91 is 136 and change. So just over that over in a sense. Now, if I want to go to scoring margin, where is that on here? Oregon is normally winning their games by 5.88. So just over that cover margin. ASU is currently losing most of their games by 6.13 points. So based on some of the averages, maybe not so much the trends of like the last couple games, but overall statistics on this season, are you taking ASU or Oregon to cover in this game?
I feel like you just got to go Oregon, man. Just unfortunately, ASU never plays the spread, and admittedly, they've done a pretty decent job as of late, with a few exceptions like the Washington game. But other than that, I mean, Connor, they played USC pretty tight a little while ago. They obviously covered against UCLA. They played U of A twice, or not twice.
They covered the first game
Yeah.
for sure, because they opened up at like 21.5 point underdogs.
Yep.
And they lost by like 11 or 12.
Yep. So ASU's been a lot better about the spread lately, and I do like that they're at home and that ASU has put together their arguably the best performance of the season against Oregon, the way they were shooting from the field and how they just were all clicking together and just meshing. They all came together, Connor. It was, like I said, arguably their best game, short of like the UCLA game. However, like we already talked about, Oregon is pissed coming into this game, and they should be. And with the way that they shot as well as they did, with how poorly their stars were shooting, and you know that's not going to happen twice. The lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. And just because it struck in Eugene doesn't mean it's going to strike here in Tempe. So I love ASU. We almost never cover the spread. I don't like the odds here.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo what you were saying before, how poorly Oregon shot as a team. Or I shouldn't say as a team because they still shot like 42%, but really from deep. Deep. And their top three players did not necessarily play up to their standard, or at least kind of what they have averaged on the season. So assuming that they play even a little bit better, not so much even excel, but just play up to what they normally do and get those like 37-ish points. I got to imagine Oregon's going to be able to cover the spread. 4.5 does not seem very much for one of the better teams in the Pac-12 compared to one of the worst teams in the Pac-12. I understand it's at home. Generally, that can seem to provide a little bit of an advantage. I will say Desert Financial does offer a pretty decent home crowd advantage in terms of the noise in there. Obviously, you have the curtain of distraction. It really feels like
stats on that. We got to get the stats on the curtain of distraction. I know there's somewhere. I know there's somewhere.
It does not seem like a bad place to play in terms of for the home team. That being said, I just for them to win this game in overtime, ASU played it very well. Oregon overall, I mean, could have played better, but again, shot 42% as a team. That's really not terrible. So, but could have definitely shot better in other aspects. Both those things have to happen again. And that does not sound like a very smart bet. I'm going to be taking Oregon to cover 4.5, winning by at least 5. It sounds like you're doing exactly the same. Now let's go ahead and move on to the over-under. As I had mentioned, both of these teams scoring on offense are scoring just above that. If I didn't mention it before, the scoring defense, so the amount of points that each team is giving up, Arizona State is giving up 70 points per game. Oregon is giving up 66. So that's, again, just right over there. They're right at about that 136. And I think if you include the decimals, I think they're actually just under 137. So, and again, like the over-under is set right at what these teams normally do. Vegas, more often than not, knows what they're talking about. I think with that in mind, they're averaging more points. They're giving up more points per game. I have not looked at any of the numbers specifically for ASU at home versus Oregon away. And that would probably be the determining factor for me. But as of right now, I would be taking the over in this game.
I agree. And if for no other reason than Oregon, I think they're going to put up a lot of points, Connor. I really do. And hopefully ASU will be able to do the same thing with the way that Marion Jackson has been shooting. You hope that Kamani Lawrence is able to reassert himself because he's been quiet. He's still been good. He's just been quiet. And then obviously we're hoping that DJ Horn gets out of his cold streak. If you find a way to get those three on the same page, first of all, I like our chances to cover. Second, that over is going to hit. Very confidently that over is going to hit. Because if for no other reason, like I said, Oregon is going to put up points. To me, there's absolutely no doubt of that in my mind. Not a shadow of a doubt. They're going to do it. Put it in stone. But I do think that ASU could possibly put up a lot of points too. Regardless, I'm taking the over.
You guys the worst scoring team in the Pac-12?
I do. Like I said, man, they put together their best performance. They didn't have Marion Jackson playing as well as he is right now. So DJ Horn just needs to get out of his funk. Kamani just needs to play like the third best player on the team, which he has been, and that's great. Marion continues what he's doing. We hit the over on what we're averaging. That I feel very confident in. Very confident.
All right. I feel like that is the death wish of anybody saying they're making a bet very confidently, and then it turns out didn't even get close to happening. But we'll see how that goes.
Don't blame me.
Tomorrow, Oregon at Arizona State. So we'll see that game tip off. I want to say it's at 8 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, I believe. So definitely a Pac-12 after dark kind of game nonetheless. So let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit. We'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about some football, specifically about the upcoming draft at the end of April. But before we do that, we're going to have to talk to you guys about our friends over at BetOnline. So football might be over for the season, but guys, basketball is still in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Rounding out the last part of the podcast here for you guys today, we are going to be talking specifically about NFL Network's Chad Reuter. He's a very well-known draft analyst, has recently put out a 3-round mock draft, and there are 2 different Sun Devils that make that list. Now, Richie, when I go through this mock, first of all, the Arizona Cardinals took 2 Pac-12 players, both from Washington. Apparently, we have some Pac-12 love, which has not been a surprise, especially with some of the other players in their secondary, specifically from Washington. Not a huge surprise there. But there are no ASU players in the first round. Are you surprised?
No, not at all. As much as I would love to see a Rachaad White sneak into round 1, the positional value is not there. Look at the rest of the guys. We do have a couple offensive linemen. We got a couple defensive backs. They're not first-round talents. Just plain and simple. Like, as much as I would love one of our guys to sneak into round 1, it's not going to happen. If it does happen, I'll eat my hat. Like, I don't have it in here right now. It's in my bedroom. It's my ASU hat. I'll eat it. I'll deep fry it, and I'll eat it if an ASU player goes in the first round.
We all would want to see that, maybe for sure, potentially on the podcast. Now, no ASU players are going in the second round. Are you surprised?
Yes, that's where I would be surprised, is because we have a good amount of I wouldn't be surprised because of the way the draft shakes out. We'll put it that way. What I will say is I could see a couple of Sun Devils go in the second round, and that's when one of the offensive linemen sneaks in there. I feel like that's Rachaad White's ceiling, is the second round. I think the sweet spot for these guys would be in the third round, but I could see a Sun Devil going in the second round depending on positional value.
What if I told you, so in the third round, one of them is drafted in the third round. The other one is a comp pick. Potentially Rachaad White going in the second round. He ends up being the comp pick in this case. But before we do that, we'll talk about the first pick taken. So Miami Dolphins take Donovan West, center from Arizona State. The third round, pick number 81. So what's that, kind of like the middle-ish of the third round? And not a huge surprise here. We've talked about some other draft analysts looking more at Donovan West. So very highly thought of. Not necessarily hard to see West going to a team like the Miami Dolphins, who have a very young offensive line and a couple of replaceable players along that line.
A bad one. Just call it a bad one. They have a bad offensive line.
I think they have some upside, but was their center, did they still have the guy from Baltimore this last season, or did they let him go?
Mascara?
Yeah.
Mr. I'm going to send the ball into orbit. No, he's gone. He didn't even make the roster. He was so bad.
I remember they signed him. I just couldn't remember if he stuck. So West fills in a position of need for the Dolphins. And again, seems to be some pretty good value here. As far as the other Pac-12 player, we kind of hinted at it. Comp pick 103. The New York Giants, which is where that gets interesting, takes running back Rachaad White out of Arizona State.
Friend of the podcast, Rachaad White.
Friend of the podcast, Rachaad White. Now, they already have Saquon Barkley, and I understand he's had his health issues. Is it interesting, maybe odd, or a good thing for them to take Rachaad White? What are your initial thoughts on that pick there?
Connor, as our friends know, as our Twitter followers know, but maybe not the Arizona State Sun Devil fans know, running backs don't matter, especially in the pros. Don't pay them.
They matter. Kind of. They kind of matter.
Exactly. When you get a good one, even then, you need to be elite. And I'm still teetering. Now, in the case of Saquon Barkley, all world talent. And that's not even giving him justice. But he has not been the same since he tore his knee up. Just plain and simple. he's going into his 5th year. He's got that 5th year option, which is not cheap. After that, he's an unrestricted free agent. This is where it gets to be an interesting conversation, is because they could potentially just let him walk and not pay a running back for a team that is trying to get younger, trying to get better, but not necessarily looking to pay a running back, right? So insert Rachaad White, a dude with some good upside and a dude who has that pass catching ability that Saquon Barkley also brought to the table earlier in his career. So what White does is he gives you that insurance policy. And what would be interesting to me is if the Giants do take a running back that high, what do you do with Barkley? Do you run him into the ground and let him go and then let a Rachaad White take over? Or do you split the carries, see what you have in Rachaad White, and if he's not good, re-sign Saquon Barkley?
Are you asking the fantasy football fan in me, or are you asking the actual NFL mind in me?
This would be more rhetorical. This is something we can get into a conversation off mic. Right,
because 100% they should split those carries, right? Like I do love Rachaad White. I think his ceiling is tremendous in the NFL. Where his floor is, who's to say? But that being said, Saquon Barkley is a phenomenal talent. I shouldn't say deserved. We don't see running backs go that high in the draft anymore. I shouldn't say anyway. It's been really a couple years since was he the second pick, pick? Second overall pick, right behind Baker Mayfield, if I remember correctly.
Yep. You redo that draft, and it's Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson in any order.
Yeah. So with that being said, we'll kind of see where that goes. But Rachaad White taken at the end of the 3rd round as a comp pick. Richie, I'm going to put you on the spot here before we hop off the podcast for today.
Hit me.
Is he going to get drafted within the first 2 days of the NFL draft?
Rachaad White?
Yep. No, it's a yes or no question. That's it. I don't need other words. I just need yes or no.
Can I phone a friend?
You're saying more words than yes or no.
I would like to use my 50-50 option.
This is a 50-50 option. That's correct.
Crap. The safe answer is no, Connor. The fan in me says yes. But the only reason I would say no, the only reason is the position, Connor.
Yep.
That's the only reason. And it's such a weird running back class where you have a Rachaad White and a Isaiah Spiller, a Kyren Williams, a Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Zamir White, James Cook, Brian Robinson, Tyler Batty. Like there are so many names. Hassan Haskins. And it's just like not even pick your poison. That's not the right term. Like, who do you fancy? Like, maybe Rachaad White's number 1 on my board, or maybe Rachaad White's number 9 on my board. It's such a weird class where there's no definitive number 1 guy that for one team, Rachaad White could be running back 1, right? Because he's got all the tools to be a starting running back. But for another team, they could look and say, we don't see the upside that we see with like a Kenneth Walker or a Breece Hall. Or maybe we're looking for a higher floor, like a Kyren Williams or an Isaiah Spiller. Or maybe we're just looking for a different kind of back. Maybe we're looking for a power back instead of this kind of one-cut style receiving back. Like there's all sorts of different factors that go into this. So I will tell you as a fan, yes, he goes day 2. As a realist, no, but he goes early on day 3. I will put it in stone. He will be a 4th round pick. At worst.
Okay.
If he goes earlier, then I'm not wrong. But at worst, a 4th round pick.
I hear what you're saying. I think I would agree with you. I don't think he ends up being a first or second day kind of a pick. So the first 3 rounds, lots going to change between now, the combine, pro days, things like that. So who knows? Maybe we can change our tune. I will say, like, even though he put this in stone, I'm not saying he's going to, because he was a phenomenal interview with us. But let's say that the consensus around the NFL is his interviews aren't necessarily going well. Maybe we don't think he's going to be a 4th round pick. Maybe the opposite happens and everyone just loves Rachaad White. I think we can at least have some time to be able to lock that in. So, but I'll go ahead and do it for us on today's episode of the podcast. If you guys want to follow us on Twitter, you can find me at Cedrios. You can find Richie at RichieBrads with a Z36. Make sure to follow our Locked On Sun Devils Twitter page at LO_Sun Devils as well. We also have content that comes out Monday through Friday for you guys. So that's going to be on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Odyssey app, as well as YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcasts and stream your content. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. Now make sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On Bets. They're going to be your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. You keep it locked on right here at the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.